The reclassification slip was dated 3 weeks after the patron who filled it out had died. I know that now because I'm the one who found it, and I'm the one who has to decide what to do with everything that came after. But on my first night, I didn't know any of it. On my first night, I knew only what the orientation packet told me, which was that the Hollis Beckworth Memorial Library closed to the public at 9, that the building stayed open to staff until 2 for shelving and intake, and that I was not, under any circumstances, to deviate from the closing procedures laid out on the laminated card clipped inside the circulation desk drawer. My name is Daniel Voss. I'm 34. Before the library, I spent 11 years doing records management for a hospital network, which is a polite way of saying I sat in a windowless room and made sure that every chart, every scan, every signed form ended up exactly where it was supposed to be, indexed and findable and impossible to lose. I was good at it. I liked it. There's a particular calm in knowing that a system holds, that nothing falls through, that for every object there is a correct place and a record of it being there. When the hospital outsourced our department, I needed work that used the same part of my brain, and the Beckworth needed a night intake clerk who could handle their backlog without supervision. The director, a soft-spoken woman named Eleanor Pruitt, hired me in 20 minutes. She said most people couldn't stand the quiet. She said I looked like someone who could. The Beckworth is not a normal public library. It started as a private collection in the 1890s, the estate of a timber magnate who left his books and his money to the town on the condition that the building bear his name and never be demolished. Over a century, it absorbed the functions of a regular branch library. So the front of the building is ordinary circulation desk, public computers, a children's room with a felt board and bean bags, large print mysteries by the door. But the back of the building, the original wing, is something else. 4 floors of stacks built around a central well, iron staircases, frosted glass floors so the light could reach down before the place had electricity. Below ground, there are 2 more levels of closed storage that the public never sees. That's where the intake room is. That's where I worked. My job was straightforward. Returned materials and donations, and interlibrary transfers came down in bins. I checked them against the catalog, repaired what needed repair, and reshelved or routed each item. I logged everything. I closed the building. The procedures card had 7 items on it, and the first 6 were the sort of thing you'd expect from an old building run by careful people. Sign the closing log at the desk on the first floor before you go below. Confirm all public floor lights are off before 9:15. Do not prop the stairwell doors. They are fire rated and must latch. The freight elevator is for materials only. Take the stairs. Return all carts to the intake room before you leave. Do not eat or drink in the closed stacks. Normal. Tedious. The kind of rules that exist because at some point someone did the opposite and ruined a book or set off an alarm. I read them twice and didn't think about them again. The 7th rule was different, and Eleanor walked me through it personally, which she didn't do for the others. If you hear the book return slot open and close after the building is empty, she said, you log the time and you finish your shift normally. You do not go to the slot. You do not look at what came through it. You shelve it the next night in daylight hours with another person present. Never alone, never at night. I asked her what would actually come through the slot after hours. The outdoor return is a brass flap in the exterior wall, the kind people drop books into when the library's closed. People use it at all hours. That's the whole point of it. She didn't smile. People use the outside slot, she said. There's a second slot, an interior one in the closed stacks that isn't connected to anything anymore. It was bricked off from the outside decades ago. So if you hear that one open and close, there's no one and nothing on the other side of it. And there will still be a book on the floor underneath it. Log it, leave it, shelve it in daylight. I want to be honest about how I received this because later it mattered. I did not think the library was haunted. I thought Eleanor was a careful older woman running a building full of irreplaceable objects, and that this rule was a piece of institutional folklore that had calcified into procedure, the kind of thing every old workplace has. A story told to new hires that everyone half believes and nobody questions, because questioning it costs nothing and following it costs nothing. I nodded. I said I understood. I meant that I would do what she asked. I did not mean that I believed her. For the first 2 weeks, nothing happened that I couldn't explain. The work absorbed me the way I'd hoped it would. The backlog was enormous bins of donations that had sat unprocessed for years. Estate gifts, water-damaged volumes waiting for triage. I'd come in at 6, take over from the day staff, and by the time the building emptied at 9, I'd be alone with the carts and the hum of the dehumidifiers and the particular smell of old paper, which is sweet and dry and a little like vanilla. I liked being down there. The closed stacks are climate-controlled and silent in a way that ordinary silence isn't, because the building is so heavy and so deep that street noise doesn't reach. You could believe down there that the rest of the world had been switched off. I learned the catalog. The Beckworth uses an old internal classification system layered under the standard one, a holdover from the original private collection, and every item has 2 call numbers, the public Dewey number, and an internal accession code that tells you where it physically lives in the closed stacks. The accession codes are a sequence: a letter for the floor, a number for the range, a number for the shelf, a number for the position, B-14-6-22, precise, total, every object in its correct place with a record of it being there. I told you I liked that kind of work. The first thing that didn't fit was a return. It came in an ordinary bin from the day's outdoor slot, a cloth-bound volume of regional history, nothing special, the kind of thing that circulates twice a decade. I scanned it to check it back in, and the system flagged it, not as overdue. Has never checked out. The record showed the book as present on the shelf. Accession code C-9-3-4. Last inventoried 8 months ago and untouched since. But I was holding it. It was in my hands, in the intake bin, with the library's own ownership stamp on the inside cover and a barcode that matched the record exactly. I'm a records person. My first assumption was a duplicate. Libraries hold multiple copies of things. Barcodes get reused after a copy is withdrawn. Mistakes happen. So I did what I would have done at the hospital. I went to verify the physical object against the record. I took the freight stairs to C, walked the ranges to 9, found shelf 3, and counted to position 4. There was a book there. Same title, same edition, same library stamp, same barcode. 2 identical objects, 1 record. I stood in the cold light of the stacks, holding one of them and looking at the other. And I told myself the only sane thing, which was that the library had acquired 2 copies at different times, cataloged them under 1 record by error, and that the discrepancy was decades old and meaningless. I bagged the one from the bin, wrote a note for the day staff to deduplicate the record, and went back to work. It bothered me, but It bothered me the way a crooked picture frame bothers you. A thing to be fixed. I want you to notice that I did everything right by my own training, and it told me nothing. That's how it starts. The system gives you an answer that satisfies the system and explains nothing real. The book on the floor came 11 days into the job. I was on the second sub-level, the deepest one, sorting a pallet of estate donations, when I heard it. A flap of metal, a soft, mechanical clack, and then the same sound in reverse. A slot opening and closing. It came from above me and to the left. From the first floor of the closed stacks, from the dead wall where Eleanor had told me the bricked-off interior return used to be. I'd located that slot during my first week out of curiosity. It's a brass panel set into a stone wall at chest height. The spring hinge still in it. A shallow steel chute behind it that goes nowhere. The outside of that wall is the alley. I'd stood in the alley on my dinner break and looked at the spot and seen exactly what Eleanor said I'd see: old brick, no opening, the slot, sealed from the outside generations ago. There is no way to put a book through that slot. There is no slot to put it through from the only side a person could stand on. And I had just heard it open and close. I did not go up the stairs to look. I'd like to tell you that's because I believed Eleanor, but it isn't. It's because I'm a coward in the specific, ordinary way most people are cowards, which is that the sound made the hair on my arms stand up, and I didn't want to be the person climbing toward a thing in the dark to confirm it. So I did the procedural thing, which happened to also be the safe thing. I noted the time in my intake log, 11:48, and I finished my shift, and I did not go to the slot. And when I left, I signed the closing log on the first floor, and I went home, and I did not sleep well. The next night, I came in early before the day staff left, and I asked a clerk named Marcus to come down to the closed stacks with me. He's a calm, heavy-set man in his 60s who's worked the Beckworth for 30 years. And when I told him I'd heard the interior slot, he just nodded like I'd told him it was raining. "Daylight," he said. "Good, let's get it." There was a book on the floor under the dead slot. Of course there was. I'd known there would be, and it still made my stomach drop to see it lying there on the stone, spine up as if dropped. Marcus picked it up without ceremony. It was a children's picture book, water-stained, decades old, the kind of thing that would have been withdrawn from circulation long ago. He turned it over and read the accession code, penciled inside the back cover, then walked me to a range on the 4th floor, the oldest floor, the top, and showed me the gap on the shelf where a book the exact width of the one in his hands was missing. He slid it into the gap. It fit. "It goes back where it came from," he said. "That's all. It always comes from somewhere in here, and it always wants to go back. You just put it back in the daylight with somebody else here, so nobody's alone with it while it's out." I asked him the question I'd been holding. Why daylight? Why 2 people? He thought about how to answer for long enough that I knew the answer wasn't simple. "Things in here have places," he said finally. "Every one of them. You know that, you do the codes. Long as everything's where it's supposed to be, the place holds. The book on the floor is a thing that's out of place. It's not where its record says it is. It's down on the floor by a slot that doesn't open. When something's out of place at night in the dark, when there's nobody to put it right, that's when the rest of it notices there's a hole. You put it back fast in the light, and the hole closes before anything finds it. That's the whole of it. That's all anybody here knows." I asked him what the rest of it was, what notices. "I've worked here 30 years, he said, "and I've never seen it, and I'd like to keep it that way, and so would you." Then he signed the daylight reshelving log. There's a separate log for that, I learned, kept in Eleanor's office going back decades. And he went back upstairs. And I stood on the 4th floor for a while, looking at the book he'd put back. An ordinary, ruined children's book, sitting in its slot like it had never been anywhere else. I should have left it there. I mean that I should have left the whole thing there, taken the rules as a closed box and never opened it. But I'm a records person, and the daylight reshelving log was a record, and a record is a thing I cannot leave unread. Eleanor kept it in a locked drawer. But the log itself wasn't secret. Marcus had signed it in front of me. And when I asked Eleanor a few nights later whether I could see the historical entries to understand the pattern, she hesitated and then said, yes, on the condition that I read it in her office and didn't remove it. I think she wanted someone careful to understand. I think she'd been carrying it alone too long. The log goes back to 1962. It's a simple ledger. Date, time the slot was heard, time the book was reshelved, the accession code of where it went, and the initials of the 2 staff present. Decades of it in a dozen different hands, the ink shifting from fountain pen to ballpoint to the cheap roller balls we use now. And at first I read it as a curiosity, then I started doing what I always do, which is cross-referencing, and the curiosity turned into something colder. The accession codes in the log weren't random. Over 60 years, the books that came through the dead slot all came from the same general region of the closed stacks. The oldest material, A and B floors, the original Beckworth bequest, the timber magnate's personal collection, and they didn't come at a steady rate. They came in clusters, quiet years, then a run of them 5, 6, 7 in a single season, and then quiet again. I'm careful about this kind of pattern. People see faces in clouds, so I built a real timeline, dates only, and I took it home and laid it against anything public I could find about the library in the town. Newspaper archives, the library's own published histories, property records, because that's a habit from the hospital, where you learn that the truth of an institution is in its boring documents. The clusters lined up with deaths, not random deaths. Deaths of people connected to the Beckworth bequest, descendants of the timber magnate, trustees of the estate, the long line of people who, across a century, had legal authority over the original collection. When one of them died, the slot got busy. In the months after a trustee's death, the dead slot would open in the dark, again and again, and a book from the original bequest would be found on the floor, out of place, wanting to go home. I sat with that for a long time before I let myself form the thought, because the thought was not a records thought. It was this. The books weren't being returned, they were being moved. Something in the closed stacks was taking them off the shelves and bringing them to the dead slot, and the staff for 60 years had been carefully putting them back in the daylight before anything noticed the gap. And the moving got worse when the people who legally held the collection died as if the collection had been promised to something held in trust, not by the town, but by something older than the town, and every death loosened the binding a little, and every misplaced book was that thing testing the walls of its agreement. I told myself I was building a story. I knew the danger of a mind like mine, which can take true facts and assemble them into a shape that feels inevitable and is still wrong. So I went looking for the thing that would break the pattern, the death with no cluster, the cluster with no death. That's the discipline. You try to kill your own theory. I couldn't kill it. Every cluster had its death. And then I found the entry that changed how I read all of it. and it's the one I started with, the one I can't get out of my head. There was a reclassification slip filed in 1978, tucked into the back of the log on Beckworth letterhead, filled out in a shaking hand. A reclassification slip is an ordinary form. It requests that an item be moved from one place in the collection to another and assigned a new accession code. This one requested that a specific volume from the original bequest be permanently sealed in the deepest storage, removed from all public records, and never reshelved on a floor again. It was signed by the last direct descendant of the timber magnate, a man named Harlan Beckworth. The slip was dated 3 weeks after Harlan Beckworth's death. I checked his death date 4 ways. Obituary, property transfer, the library's own published history, the trustee succession record. He died in March of 1978. The reclassification slip is dated April. The handwriting matches his signature on the earlier trustee records exactly. I'm not a graphologist, but it isn't a casual forgery. It's the same cramped, backward-leaning hand, just shakier, the way a hand gets when it's old or afraid or both. A dead man filed a form 3 weeks after he died, asking the library to take one book and bury it where nothing could reach it. And the form had been honored. There was a reshelving entry that matched it in the daylight log, April 1978. 2 sets of initials, an accession code I'd never seen before. A sub-level 2 code, the deepest floor, a sealed range that doesn't appear in the public catalog at all. The book Harlan Beckworth asked to be buried had been buried exactly where he asked. That's when the work stopped being interesting and started being something I couldn't put down at the end of the night. I want to be clear about my state of mind here, because it's easy telling this afterward to make myself sound either braver or stupider than I was. I was neither. I was a man who had found a genuine impossibility inside a system he trusted, and the trust was the problem. I believe in records. I believe that the document is true and the world arranges itself around the document. A form dated after a man's death broke that belief in a place I didn't know I had, and I needed to repair it, and the only way to repair it was to go down to sub-level 2 and find out whether the book Harlan Beckworth buried was actually there. I knew the rules. I knew you don't go alone. You don't go at night. You don't go looking for the thing the rules are built to keep you away from. The rules existed to stop exactly what I was about to do. I understood that the way you understand a sign that says thin ice while you're already walking toward it because you want to see the shape under the surface. But here's the part I can defend, the part that made it feel reasonable. I wasn't going to take the book off the shelf. I wasn't going to read it or move it or bring it to the slot. I only wanted to confirm it existed where the records said it did, to restore the system, not to break it, to put one true thing back in its place, the place being my own understanding of what was real. I told myself that observing wasn't the same as interfering. I told myself the rules were about moving things, not looking at them. I was wrong about that, and the rules had already told me I was wrong, and I'd read them too fast to hear it. Rule 7. You do not look at what came through. Looking was the thing. Looking was always the thing. But I didn't understand that yet. I went down on a Tuesday near the end of my shift around 1 in the morning. I took the stairs because the freight elevator is for materials and I follow rules even while I'm breaking the one that matters. Sub-level 2 is the only floor without the frosted glass. It's solid stone and poured concrete, the air denser, the dehumidifiers louder because the damp fight's harder down there. The sealed range was at the far end. behind a steel mesh gate that I had the key for, because I had keys for everything. That's why they hired me. A man trusted with the whole system. I found the accession code from the 1978 entry. I walked the range counting positions, my flashlight on the spines, most of them unlabeled down here. Just leather and cloth and the pale rectangles where old labels had fallen away. The position was empty. Not empty, like a gap where a book had been pulled. Empty like the shelf had been built without it, the dust undisturbed. The spines on either side leaning slightly into the space, the way books lean when nothing has stood between them for a very long time. The book Harlan Beckworth asked to be buried was not in the place the record said it was buried. And I knew with a certainty that arrived in my body before my mind agreed to it, exactly where it was. It was upstairs, on the floor, under the dead slot, waiting to be put back. I hadn't heard the slot that night. I'd been on sub-level 2 the whole time, too deep, the concrete too thick. But I knew. I went up the stairs faster than the rules allow. 4 floors of iron treads ringing under me. And when I came out onto the first floor of the closed stacks, the dead slot's brass flap was still trembling, just barely. The spring not quite settled, as if it had opened a moment before I arrived. There was a book on the floor under it. It was small and dark, and bound in something that had once been fine and was now cracked like dry mud. There was no label on the spine, but I didn't need one. I knew what it was. And I was alone, and it was night, and the book was out of place, and there was nobody to put it right. I should have done what the rules said even then. Logged the time, left it, called Marcus in the morning and reshelved it in daylight, in the deepest range, with 2 of us present and the lights on. The rule still worked. The rule had worked for 60 years on books exactly like this one. The procedure didn't care whether I'd broken the spirit of it by going looking. The procedure was a machine, and the machine still functioned if I just stepped back and let it. But I'd come down to restore my understanding of what was real. And the thing on the floor was the answer to the only question I'd come to ask. And I looked at it. That's all I did. I want that on the record, since the record is the only thing I have left that I trust. I did not touch it. I did not open it. I shone my flashlight on the floor, and I looked at the book that a dead man had filed a form to bury, and the cover was facing up, and I read the title, which was a name, which was the timber magnate's own name, followed by 2 dates, the second of which had not yet happened in 1890, when the book was bound, but which I recognized because I'd written it on a timeline in my own hand. The week before. It was the date Harlan Beckworth died. The last of the line. And there were more names under it. A column of them, embossed, faint in the cracked leather, names and pairs of dates. And the dates ran forward past 1978, paid, past the year I was born, and the column wasn't finished. There was room left on the cover. There was room left for more. I understood the rules then, all at once and far too late. The way you understand a sentence only when you reach the period at the end. The books that came through the dead slot were never random. They were always the same book, taking different shapes, the way a thing too large to be seen shows you only the part of itself. You're equipped to look at a regional history, a children's picture book, a duplicate that shouldn't exist. The shapes were lures. The staff put them back in daylight with 2 people present because 2 people are witnesses, and witnesses keep each other from looking too long, and the daylight is for the same reason. Daylight is for everything. So you can see the whole of a thing and not just the part that wants to be seen. The book wasn't being returned to the library. The library was the thing keeping the book from being read. Every accession code, every inventory, every careful record, 60 years of clerks putting things back exactly where they belonged. It was all one enormous act of refusal. A whole institution built to make sure that nobody ever finished reading the list. Because the list is a ledger, and the timber magnate didn't leave his books to the town out of generosity. He left them as a wall. He bound something into that collection when he made it, something he'd promised payment to and couldn't fully pay. And the payment is the names, and the names are taken in order down the line of everyone who holds the collection in trust. And the binding holds only as long as the collection stays whole and ordered and unread. He buried his own name on sub-level 2 and asked the staff to keep it there. And they did. And the binding held the line at his line until the book climbed back up the stairs on its own, the way it had been climbing for years. Patient testing, looking for the one clerk careless enough to come down, looking and look too long and read his own. I didn't read the bottom of the column. I want to be clear about that. I turned the flashlight away before I reached the open space at the end of the names. I logged the time, 1:31, and I left the book on the floor, and I went up to the first floor and signed the closing log with a hand that didn't feel like mine. And I drove home, and I have not gone back. That was 19 days ago. I called Eleanor the next morning and told her the book Harlan Beckworth buried was on the floor under the dead slot. And there was a long silence. And then she asked me, very quietly, whether I had looked at it. I said no. She knew I was lying. I could hear her know it. She told me Marcus would reshelve it in daylight in the sealed range, and that I should take some time off. She didn't fire me. I almost wish she had. Being fired is a record that closes a file. Instead, I'm on leave, which is a record that stays open, a position held. My name's still in the staff system, still in the closing logs list of people authorized to be alone in the building at night. Here's the thing I keep going back to, the thing that won't let me sleep. The reclassification slip was dated 3 weeks after Harlan Beckworth died. A dead man filed a form asking the library to protect the next person in the line. And I've checked the way I check everything, because checking is all I have. There's no one left in the timber magnate's line. Harlan was the last. The column on the cover should have ended with him. But the column wasn't finished. There was room left for more names. And the night I went down there, the binding wasn't loose because a trustee had died. There'd been no death. There was no cluster. I broke my own pattern looking for the entry that would break it, and I found it, and it was me. The book climbed the stairs that night for no reason in the record, except that the record by then had a new name in its system. A person trusted with all the keys, alone in the building at night. The kind of person who reads things he's told to leave on the floor. I don't know if it took my name when I looked. I turned the light away. I tell myself I turned it away in time, but I keep thinking about the reclassification slip. About how a man 3 weeks dead reached back through the system to ask the library to bury the thing that kept the list going. And how the only way he could have known to file that form, the only way he could have written it in his own shaking hand 3 weeks after his heart stopped, is if reading your name doesn't end you all at once. It opens your file. And the file stays open, and you get a little while, a few weeks, long enough to make one last record, to fill out one last form, to leave one last instruction for whoever comes after before they come down, to put you back where you belong, in the daylight, with someone else present, so nobody has to be alone with what you've become. If you ever work nights in an old library and you find a book on the floor under a slot that doesn't open, log the time and walk away. Don't go looking for where it came from. Don't read the cover. Whatever the rules tell you not to do, the reason is older than the rules, and the people who wrote them aren't trying to scare you. They're trying to keep your name off the list. And if you're reading this and you work at the Beckworth, and a new intake clerk has started on the night shift while I've been away, check the closing log. Check whose name is still in the system. And if you find a reclassification slip in my handwriting dated after you'd have reason to expect it, please do what it says. Bury it deep in the dark, where nothing can finish reading it. Don't look at the date.